"Get the hell out of my house right now," Victor Harrington roared, hurling the nanny's suitcase into the deep snow. "If you can't make my son speak, you're worthless." The terrified woman stumbled backward into the freezing Christmas Eve night, tears freezing on her cheeks as she fled the multi-million-dollar lakeside mansion. Inside, 7-year-old Lucas curled into a tiny ball under the grand piano, shaking violently and completely silent, just as he had been for the last 3 years. While the rest of Seattle sparkled with golden Christmas lights, cheerful carols, and laughing families, Victor's sprawling estate stood cold and lifeless. The towering Christmas tree in the foyer remained bare, its unlit lights a perfect symbol of the darkness that had swallowed this once happy home. 3 years ago, Victor's wife had died in a horrific car accident. Since that night, the brilliant but ruthless tech billionaire had transformed into a heartless man who trusted no one. He had fired 11 nannies in 3 years, each one failing to reach the broken little boy who refused to speak, refused to smile, and screamed if anyone tried to touch him. A soft, hesitant knock echoed through the marble foyer. Victor yanked the door open with a scowl. Standing in the falling snow was Anny Thompson, a black woman in a simple but neat red coat, holding only a worn suitcase and a small handmade paper star. Her dark eyes were steady and warm despite the biting cold. Victor looked her up and down with pure contempt. "You're the agency's last resort, I suppose. Let me make one thing clear, Miss Thompson. If you fail like the others, I will destroy your reputation so thoroughly you'll never work again." Annie glanced past the cold billionaire toward the frightened child hiding in the shadows. Little did Victor Harrington know, this Christmas Eve would bring a miracle that would change all 3 of their lives forever. 3 years ago, Christmas lights had also twinkled across Seattle, but that night had ended in pure tragedy. Victor Harrington had been in the middle of a critical board meeting when the call came. His wife, Claire, had taken their 4-year-old son Lucas out for a holiday drive to see the city lights. A drunk driver ran a red light, slamming into their car. Claire died instantly. Lucas, strapped in his car seat, survived with only minor injuries but witnessed everything. The image of his mother's lifeless body stayed burned into the little boy's mind. From that moment, Lucas stopped speaking. Not a single word, not even a whisper. Therapists, child psychologists, and specialists all said the same thing. Selective mutism caused by severe trauma. The boy who once laughed and sang Christmas carols now hid under furniture whenever strangers came near. He woke up screaming from nightmares almost every night. Victor, drowning in guilt, buried himself deeper into his tech empire. Work became his only escape. Money became his only comfort. Love became something he no longer believed in. In the years that followed, Victor turned into a different man. The once devoted husband and father became cold, controlling, and ruthless. He fired anyone who showed even the slightest weakness. 11 nannies had come and gone. Some lasted only days. The last one had been thrown out into the snow just hours earlier. Victor told himself he was doing it for Lucas, but deep down he knew the truth. He was terrified of failing his son again. Meanwhile, across town in a modest neighborhood, Anny Thompson carried her own scars. Orphaned at 8 years old after her parents died in a house fire, she had grown up moving between foster homes. The only real love she ever knew came from her grandmother, who raised her until she was 26. Annie had dreamed of becoming a preschool teacher. She had even completed 2 years of college, pouring her heart into learning how to help children heal through play and kindness. But when her grandmother fell ill with cancer, Annie dropped everything to care for her. She worked nights as a caregiver and spent her days at the hospital. Her grandmother passed away 2 years ago, leaving Annie with nothing but memories and a deep, quiet strength. Now 34, Annie worked as a freelance nanny and volunteered at her local church every Christmas, helping families who had nowhere else to go. She believed that no child was truly broken, only waiting for the right person to show them love. When the agency called her that afternoon with Victor's urgent request, Annie had hesitated. She had heard the rumors about the cold billionaire who destroyed reputations, but something in her heart stirred when they mentioned little Lucas, a silent, frightened boy who had lost his voice on Christmas. That evening, as she stood in the grand but empty foyer of the Harrington mansion, Annie felt the weight of both their pains. She could see the invisible walls Victor had built around himself, and the even thicker ones surrounding his son. Victor watched her from the staircase, arms crossed. "You have 1 week, Miss Thompson. 1 week to do what 11 others couldn't. After that, you're gone." Annie looked up at him calmly, her voice soft but steady. "Mr. Harrington, some wounds can't be healed in a week, but I promise you this. I will not run away like the others." She didn't know it yet, but the broken billionaire and the silent little boy were about to meet someone whose own pain had taught her how to love in the darkest places. The first few days in the Harrington mansion were painfully quiet. Victor had made it clear he wanted no interaction with Annie unless absolutely necessary. He spent most of his time locked in his home office overlooking the frozen lake, watching stock numbers instead of his son. But Annie refused to be discouraged. Instead of forcing Lucas to speak or follow strict schedules like the previous nannies, she simply sat on the floor near him, never too close, and began to sing. Soft, gentle Christmas carols her grandmother used to sing to her. "Silent night. Holy night." Her voice was warm and rich, filling the cold marble halls with something the house hadn't felt in years. At first, Lucas stayed hidden under the grand piano, knees pulled to his chest. But on the third morning, Annie noticed his small fingers tapping lightly against the floor in time with the melody. She smiled, but said nothing. That afternoon, she brought out simple ingredients from the kitchen: flour, sugar, cinnamon, and ginger. "I used to make these with my grandma," she said softly, not expecting an answer. "Would you like to help me make gingerbread cookies?" To Victor's shock, as he watched secretly from the second-floor balcony, Lucas slowly crawled out from his hiding spot. He didn't speak, but he stood a few feet away, watching Annie roll the dough. When she offered him a cookie cutter shaped like a star, his tiny hand reached out and took it. Their fingers brushed for the first time. Lucas didn't pull away. By evening, the scent of warm gingerbread and cinnamon filled the entire mansion. Annie placed a plate of freshly baked cookies on the coffee table and began decorating the giant Christmas tree that had stood bare for years. She hung the small paper star she had brought with her on the lowest branch, right at Lucas's eye level. Victor stood in the shadows, arms crossed, observing everything. He expected the boy to run away at any moment. Instead, Lucas walked closer to the tree. He stared at the paper star for a long time, then reached up and gently touched it with one finger. For the briefest second, the corner of his mouth lifted not quite a smile, but something close. Something Victor hadn't seen in 3 long years. That night, when Lucas had another nightmare, Annie was there before Victor could even reach the boy's room. She didn't turn on the bright lights. She sat on the edge of the bed in the soft glow of a nightlight and hummed the same lullaby. Lucas's trembling slowly eased. He didn't push her away. For the first time since the accident, the little boy fell back asleep without screaming. Victor, standing at the doorway, felt something crack inside his chest. He quickly turned away before Annie could see the emotion in his eyes. The next morning, he left an envelope with a generous bonus and a short note. "Keep doing whatever you're doing." Annie continued her quiet magic. She told Lucas gentle stories about hope and second chances while they colored Christmas drawings together. She took him outside into the light snow, letting him feel the flakes on his cheeks. With every small act of patience and kindness, the thick wall around Lucas's heart showed another tiny fracture. The Christmas spirit, once frozen out of the mansion, was slowly finding its way back, in one song, one cookie, one paper star at a time. But Victor still kept his distance. He told himself it was only temporary, that no one could truly heal what had been broken. He had no idea how wrong he was. The warmth that had begun to fill the Harrington mansion lasted only a few short days before the outside world crashed in. It started with a single photograph. Someone, a member of the housekeeping staff, most likely had snapped a picture of Annie and Lucas decorating the Christmas tree together. Lucas was actually smiling, something no one had seen in years. The photo somehow made its way to social media, and then to the tabloids. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Millionaire Victor Harrington's new black nanny. Is she healing his son, or aiming for the wife position? Nanny to wife pipeline. Harrington's latest conquest? Victor's mother, Margaret Harrington, arrived at the mansion like a storm. The elegant, silver-haired socialite had never approved of her son's choice in nannies, but this time she was furious. "Victor, have you lost your mind?" she hissed in the grand living room while Annie was upstairs with Lucas. "A black woman from nowhere? The press is having a field day. Our investors are calling me. They think you've gone soft, or worse, that she's manipulating you." Victor stood by the window, jaw clenched. He had seen the articles. He had received the concerned messages from business partners. The old fear of appearing weak, of losing control, came rushing back. That evening, when Annie came downstairs after putting Lucas to bed, Victor was waiting for her in the foyer. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice ice cold. "We need to talk." Annie noticed the change in his tone immediately. The man who had left her a bonus just days ago now looked at her like she was the enemy. "I've seen the news," Victor continued. "The rumors. People think you're trying to replace my wife. That you're using my son to get closer to me and my money." Annie's heart sank, but she kept her voice steady. "Mr. Harrington, I have never—" He cut her off sharply. "My mother thinks you're a gold digger. My business partners are questioning my judgment. And honestly, I'm starting to wonder too. You come in here with your songs and cookies, acting like some savior. How do I know this isn't all an act?" The words hit Annie like a slap. She stood tall, though her eyes glistened with hurt. "I left my own life to come here, because I care about your son. Not your money, not you, just Lucas. That boy is terrified of being abandoned again, and you're pushing everyone away." Victor laughed bitterly. "You think you understand my son better than I do? You've been here less than 2 weeks." Their voices grew louder. Neither noticed little Lucas standing at the top of the staircase, clutching his teddy bear, watching everything with wide, terrified eyes. "You're just like the others," Victor spat, pretending to care until the paycheck stops. "I want you gone by Christmas morning. Pack your things." Annie's voice broke for the first time. "If I leave now, Lucas will think I abandoned him too. Please, don't do this to him." But Victor had already turned away, his walls fully back up. "One more word, and I'll have security escort you out tonight." That night, Lucas had the worst meltdown in years. He screamed silently, tears streaming down his face, throwing anything he could reach. When Annie tried to comfort him, he pushed her away, not out of anger, but pure fear. The fragile trust they had built was shattering. Annie sat alone in her room later, tears falling quietly. She had promised herself she wouldn't run. But the pain in her chest was real. Still, every time she thought about leaving, she remembered the little boy who had finally touched her hand while making gingerbread cookies. She remembered the paper star on the Christmas tree. She couldn't leave. Not yet. Meanwhile, Victor stood in his dark office, staring at the frozen lake. He told himself he was protecting his family, protecting his son, but deep down, a small voice whispered that he was destroying the one good thing that had entered their lives in 3 long, cold years. Christmas was only 2 days away, and the miracle that had been blossoming now hung by a thread. Christmas Eve arrived, wrapped in heavy snowfall. The Harrington mansion should have been glowing with warmth, but the tension from the previous night still hung thick in the air. Victor had barely slept. He kept replaying his cruel words to Annie, yet his pride refused to let him apologize. Annie had spent the evening quietly packing her suitcase, though her heart wasn't in it. She couldn't leave without saying goodbye to Lucas. Just after midnight, she crept to his room to check on him one last time. The bed was empty. "Lucas?" she whispered, panic rising in her chest. A cold gust of wind blew through the hallway. The front door was wide open. Annie ran downstairs, her bare feet slapping against the marble. The security alarm was silent. Lucas had learned how to disarm it weeks ago while watching his father. She grabbed her red coat and rushed into the blinding snow. "Lucas!" she screamed into the storm. The little boy was running through the deep snow in only his pajamas, tears freezing on his face. He had heard his father tell Annie to leave. The fear of another abandonment had pushed him over the edge. He didn't know where he was going, he just knew he had to find her. Victor, hearing the commotion, bolted out of his office and saw the open door. His blood ran cold. He grabbed a flashlight and ran after them. The snow was falling so heavily, it was almost impossible to see. Annie spotted a small figure stumbling near the frozen lake edge. "Lucas, stop!" she cried, running as fast as she could. The boy slipped and fell hard into the snow. He tried to get up but collapsed again, his small body shaking violently from cold and terror. Annie reached him first. She dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms, shielding him from the wind. "I'm here, baby. I'm here. I won't leave you." Lucas clung to her desperately. Then, in a voice hoarse from 3 years of silence, he cried out the words no one thought they would ever hear again. "Mommy, don't leave me. Please, Mommy." Annie froze. Tears streamed down her face as she held him tighter. "I'm here, sweetheart. Mommy's here." In that moment, something miraculous happened. Lucas, who had refused to walk anywhere without being carried since the accident, pushed himself up. His thin legs trembled, but he stood. Step by shaky step, he walked toward Annie, still holding her coat, refusing to let go. Victor arrived just in time to witness everything. The flashlight slipped from his hand. He watched his son, the boy who hadn't spoken or walked on his own in 3 years, take those precious steps while calling Annie Mommy. The walls Victor had built for 3 long years shattered completely. The powerful billionaire fell to his knees in the snow, sobbing uncontrollably for the first time since his wife's funeral. Annie looked up and saw him. She didn't speak at first. She simply carried Lucas back toward the house, the boy now resting his head on her shoulder. Inside, with Lucas wrapped in warm blankets by the fireplace, Victor finally broke his silence. "Why?" he asked, voice cracking. "After everything I said to you, why did you run after him?" Annie looked at him with tired but steady eyes. "Because I know exactly how he feels, Mr. Harrington. I was orphaned at 8. I spent years terrified that everyone I loved would leave me. When I heard about Lucas, I saw myself in him. That's why I stayed. Not for your money. Not for any other reason. Just for him." Victor stared at her, tears still falling. The ruthless CEO was gone. In his place was a broken man finally facing his failures. "I was wrong," he whispered, "about everything. I pushed you away because I was scared. Scared that if I let you in, I'd have to feel again. But you brought light back into this house. Into my son." Lucas, still in Annie's arms, reached out and touched his father's face for the first time in years. "Daddy, don't make Mommy leave." Victor pulled both of them into his embrace, crying harder. The Christmas tree lights finally turned on, bathing the room in soft, golden warmth. On this holy night, the real miracle wasn't just that Lucas had spoken and walked. It was that 3 broken hearts had finally found their way to each other. Christmas morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Harrington mansion, casting a golden glow over the newly decorated tree. For the first time in 3 years, the house felt alive. Victor Harrington sat on the soft carpet beside the fireplace, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. His eyes were red from crying, but for the first time in years, they held peace. Lucas sat in Annie's lap, playing quietly with a new set of wooden trains she had wrapped as a gift. Every few minutes, the little boy would look up at Annie and softly say, "Mommy," as if making sure she was still there. Each time he spoke, Victor's heart tightened with both joy and regret. Annie gently stroked Lucas's curls. She had stayed up most of the night, comforting the boy and talking with Victor. There were no more walls between them now. Victor reached out and took Annie's hand. His voice was low and raw. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Annie. I said terrible things to you. I almost destroyed the one person who was brave enough to love my son when I couldn't." Annie looked at him with those same warm, steady eyes that had first walked through his door. "You were hurting, Victor. We were all hurting. Pain makes people build walls. I understand that better than most." He squeezed her hand tighter. "Stay. Please. Not as Lucas's nanny, but as part of this family. I don't want to wake up another Christmas without you here." Lucas looked up, and nodded eagerly. "Mommy, stay," he whispered. His voice still soft but clear. Tears slipped down Annie's cheeks as she smiled. "I'll stay." Later that morning, Victor did something no one expected. He called his mother Margaret and told her firmly that Annie was no longer just an employee, she was the woman who had saved his son and was healing his heart. He also released a short statement to the press. "The rumors are false. Anny Thompson saved my son's life. She is the miracle we had been praying for." As the day continued, the mansion transformed. Christmas carols played softly in the background. The three of them decorated cookies together, laughed at Lucas's messy frosting-covered face, and opened gifts under the glowing tree. Victor even wore the silly reindeer sweater Annie had bought as a joke. For the first time in years, real laughter echoed through the halls. In the quiet evening, as snow fell gently outside, Victor pulled Annie close while Lucas slept peacefully between them on the oversized sofa. "I spent 3 years thinking money could fix everything," he whispered. "But you showed me that family matters more than wealth. Christmas miracles don't just heal children, they heal the deepest wounds in all of us." Annie rested her head on his shoulder. "And sometimes, the greatest gifts come in the form of a scared little boy and a woman who refused to give up." As the clock struck midnight on Christmas night, Lucas stirred in his sleep and murmured happily, "Mommy, Daddy," before smiling. The broken millionaire, the silent child, and the kind-hearted black nanny had become a real family born not from blood or money, but from love, forgiveness, and one beautiful Christmas miracle. And somewhere in the quiet Seattle night, the stars seemed to shine just a little brighter, as if the universe itself was smiling down on 3 healed hearts that had finally found their way home.